Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be working out the scavenger hunt that we did on Thursday. If you are not here, this is pretty much what we worked on. And we also worked on our original coloring sheet and the additional coloring sheet and maze that you could have picked up. So if you started on this one, it's fine. If you didn't start on this one, that's fine. It was in this order though. So if you started on the one that was like factoring and solving x squared plus 9x equals negative 14, that would have been in the same order once we get to it. So let's start with this one, solve by a quadratic formula. So our quadratic formula is always negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So if you can't visualize the formula every single time, write it down. And if you cannot visualize what your a, b, or c is, you need to identify it every single time. So first, I want to put it in my general form so I can identify my a, b, and c very clearly. So I want my negative 9 on the other side, or move it. So plus 9 on both sides cancels out. I'm left with positive 9 equals 0. Now I can identify a is 10, b is negative 4, and c is 9. So I'm using my formula. Negative b, instead of b, I'm plugging in or substituting in negative 4 plus or minus the square root b squared. So I'm going to put parentheses, negative 4 squared minus 4 times my a, which is 10, and my c, which is 9. Now I'm going to divide this. And I have 2 times my a, which is 10. Then I'm going to simplify. No, you cannot put all of this in the calculator because the calculator is not going to calculate all of this underneath the square root with the square root. So you can substitute what's under the square root into the calculator and figure out what's under the square root, but it will not calculate it with the square root. So we've got negative times a negative, which is a positive, plus or minus. Then we're going to type in that parentheses negative 4 parentheses squared minus 4 times 10 times 9. And you should get 376. All over 2 times 10 gives me 20. Then I'm going to separate out or do a factor tree for 376. So how we do our factor tree is 376 goes on top, and we're asking ourselves, what times what gives us 376? Well, if you can't think of that number, you can identify that it's an even number. So all even numbers, 2 goes into it evenly. When I say evenly, that means I can divide it by 2 and it not be a decimal or a fraction. So when I divide it by 2, I have 188. That means 2 times 188 gives me 376. Again, I have an even number, so I'm going to divide it by 2, and I get 94. 94 is an even number, so I can do it again. When I divide it, I get 47. Now, 47, I cannot divide it anymore. Only thing that goes into 47 is that 1 and 47. So then I go back to my parentheses, or my square root. So my square root is now 2 times 2 times 2 times 47. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 47. Well, my little saying I like to use is there's 2 2s, they're a pair, they're gonna get married, become one, and move out of the house. So because they become one, I only have 1, 2 on the outside of the house. And what's left is that 2 times 47. Well, there's already multiplication. We're not changing that multiplication, so we're putting them back together to get that 94 that we had originally before we separated those two out. So now we can go back to our quadratic formula. We have 4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 94 all over 20. So now we're going to simplify. We're looking at our fractions. Our fractions is 4 over 20 and 2 over 20. So 4 divided by 20 gives us 1/5 plus or minus. Then we have a 2 over 20. That gives us 1/10 times the square root of 94. So that is our answer. You can leave it in this form as much as you want to, but you can also rewrite it because this plus and minus gives us two different answers. So we have 1/5 plus 1/10 times the square root of 94. We also have 1/5 subtract 1/10 times the square root of 94. So you can either write this whole answer with a plus or minus, or you could write both of these. So you would have to write and that 1/5 minus 1/10 times the square root of 94. So this answer was found in our second one, which was factor this equation out into factored form. So factored form is giving us parentheses. And typically we're having our x and our x here, we're having plus or minus our magic numbers. Solving is our x equals a number. X equals a number. Now our quadratic formula. When we used our quadratic formula, these were our answers. These were our x equals these two different numbers or two different values. So for this one, we're stopping after we factor and not getting the x equals. So first I want it in my normal standard form. So I have 5x squared. I want to move the 13x over, so I'm going to subtract 13x from both sides. So I have subtract 13x plus 6, and this cancels out to 0. So now I'm going to slide and divide. I'm going to move my 5 over to my 6 by multiplying. Remember, you're multiplying when you're sliding. So I got x squared minus 13x plus 30. Now I like to use the big X method just to organize my thoughts. If you have another way, that's perfectly fine. Your C goes on the right, your B goes on the left, and you're asking yourself what two numbers multiply to give you 30, but also add or subtract to get to 13. Well, we can start a table if you need it. What number goes into any number? 1. So I can do 1 times 30. 1 and 30 is not going to get me to 13 by adding or subtracting, so that's not happening. We have an even number, so we could always divide by 2, and we would get 2 and 15. So 2 and 15, that would work. So 2, 15, negative 13. So 2, 15 plus to giving us negative 13. Now, to get to negative 13, which one would have to be negative? 15. So we would have to have 2 minus 15 gives us negative 13. That is correct. But remember, you have to multiply the two numbers to get to positive 30. You could not have one positive number and one negative number to get a positive 30. So 2 and 15 are out as well. Well, can 3 go into 30 evenly? Yes. 3 times 10. Now if we had 3 plus 10, gives us negative 13. Well, if both of them are negative, negative 3 plus negative 10 does give us negative 13. If we have a negative times a negative, it also gives us positive. So negative 3 and negative 10 are special numbers, or magic numbers. So we put our magic numbers in our parentheses. So we were factoring at this step, this expression. And our variable that we're using is x, so x comes first in both parentheses. We have negative 3 as one of our special numbers, or magic numbers, so we have subtract 3. The other special number was negative 10, so we have subtract 10. Now, what about that 5 that we slid earlier? We cannot forget to divide by that number. Because we slid it, this is the divide part, slide and divide part. So, can we simplify to a whole number 3 over 5? No. So that 5 gets slid back over to the front. So we have 5x minus 3. Then we go to our second parentheses. Can we simplify 10 divided by 5? Yes. So we do not slide it in the front of the parentheses, we simplify. Only when you can simplify to a whole number do you simplify. And here is our factor form. So this answer was found at the top of the next one. So this would be the third one if you ended up starting at the same spot I did. So this one we are asked to factor and solve. Remember that solve word is telling us we want x equals. So first I want to make it into the form that I'm used to, plus 9x. I want to move that 14 over, so I'm going to add 14 on both sides. And it's going to equal 0 because the 14s cancel out. So now I'm going to simply factor. So I don't have to slide anything on this one because our a is that imaginary 1 with the x squared. It's imaginary 1 because I don't have to have it there, because multiplying by 1 doesn't change the value of that x squared. So I'm going to use my big X method. My c goes to the right. My b goes to the left. And I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together to give you 14, but also add to give you 9. So what goes into 14? So any number, one can go into it evenly, so 1 times 14 gives you 14. Well, 1 and 14 can't add or subtract to each other to get you 9, so that's not our magic numbers. How about 2 and 7? 2 times 7 gives you 14. You can also add 2 and 7 to get 9. So those are our magic numbers. So we have our parentheses. Again, our variable that we are factoring is x, so x goes first in our parentheses. Our 2 and our 7 are both positive, so we have addition in front of them in the parentheses. Now to solve, we're taking one parentheses and setting it equal to 0. So we have x plus 2 equals 0. I want x by itself, so I'm going to subtract the 2 from both sides. 2 minus 2 cancels out. I'm left with x equals negative 2. Then I have my second parentheses. I have x plus 7 equals 0. I want x by itself, so I'm going to minus 7 minus 7. 7 minus 7 cancels out. I'm left with x equals negative 7. So my answer should have looked like this if you were going around in the scavenger hunt. that was for when x squared plus 9x equals negative 14 was factored and solved for our two answers. This answer was found at the top of this one. Factor and solve 7x squared equals 42x. So for this one, we're going to put it into the general form that we're used to. If you need it, the general form that I continue to put all of these in is ax squared plus bx plus c. Key thing is that a is always attached to the variable that's squared, b is always attached to the variable that has an exponent of 1, understood, and c is the constant that is always attached to no variable or not attached at all to any variables. So for this one, I want everything moved to the left side, and I want the right side equal to 0. So I have 7x squared equals, well, to move positive 42x, I'm going to subtract it from both sides. 42x minus 42x cancels out. I'm left with 7x squared minus 42x equals 0. Now, a few days ago, we determined that if we had a b or c missing, that we would solve a certain way. So if we have a c missing, so missing c, because we don't have that typical constant that doesn't have a variable with it, we're going to factor by using our GCF, or our greatest common factor. Easiest way to do greatest common factor is first look at your smallest number. Can 7 go into 42 evenly? Yes. If it can't go, our smallest number can't go into the bigger number, then we try to find a greatest common factor as big as possible. So if both of them are even, 2 can always go into them. See if 4 can go into them. It depends on the numbers. But in this case, smallest number can go into the biggest number, so our greatest common factor is that 7. We also need to realize that both of them have x's. One has 2 x's, the second term only has 1 x. So the max number of x's both of them have in common is 1x. Once we've determined our greatest common factor, we're dividing each term by that 7x. So from our original problem, I have a 7x squared. I'm going to change that, expanding it by 7 times x times x. And I'm going to divide it by my greatest common factor. No, you do not need to write out all of these extra steps. I am simply making sure you can see all of my steps and all of my thought process to see if you're thinking and doing it correctly as well. So 7 divided by 7 cancels out because it becomes 1, and multiplying by 1 doesn't change anything, so we don't have to write it. X divided by x, doesn't matter what the x is, it still cancels out, and I'm simply left with x. Now my other term was negative 42 times my 1x, so I'm going to divide it by my greatest common factor, which was 7x. And you can put multiplication in there if you need to. X divided by x cancels out. Then I have to do negative 42 divided by 7. Negative 42 divided by 7 gives me negative 6. So to create my factored form, remember you have to have a factored form before you solve, and this one you had to solve. I want to create one parentheses, and I'm going to put my GCF on the outside of my parentheses. So I have 7x. I have my x from my first term when I divided my greatest common factor, and then I have negative 6. Because it's negative, I'm having subtraction in my parentheses. If my 6 was positive, then I would be adding in my parentheses. Now I need to set both of them equal to 0 to solve. If you don't need to put the step for 7x, you don't have to. But if you don't know why we can just skip it, we have it set up equal to 0. To get x by itself, we would have to divide by 7, divide by 7. 7's cancel out. I'm left with x equals 0. And because 0 divided by any number is just 0. So then our x minus 6, I want to set it up equal to 0. I'm going to add 6 to both sides. I'm left with x equals 6. So my solutions should have looked like x equals 0 and 6. That should have been my answer. And if you were following along in the scavenger hunt, this answer should have been found on top of this one. Factor and solve 4x squared minus 32x plus 28. So we're going to factor this. Again, if you really like the quadratic formula, you could use the quadratic formula. But this one didn't specify, so we're going to use a different method. I'm going to use the slide and divide method. I'm going to take my A, and I'm going to move it all the way over. When I slide it all the way over to my C, I'm going to multiply. So then I end up, sorry, I thought that there was a 4 in the x one, my bad. So I end up with x squared minus 32x plus 112. So then I'm going to use my big X method. My C is 112. My B is negative 32. My special numbers, going down the table, going down through my calculator, however you need to do it. Your special numbers are going to be 4 and 28. And you're going to have to add both of them negative to get that negative 32. And you're going to have two negatives to make a positive for the multiplication. So you're going to have, again, the variable that we're factoring is x. So one magic number is subtract 4. The other one is subtract 28. Now remember, we already slid our A. So we can't forget to go back and divide by that A that we slid. So we gotta divide by 4 from our magic numbers. If we can simplify, we simplify. If we can't, we've gotta slide it in front of the X. So we have 4 divided by 4 is 1. So we do simplify. For our second one, 28 divided by 4 can simplify, so I have negative 7. Then I go and solve, so I'm going to set both of them equal to 0. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and I get x equals 1. Second parentheses, x minus 7 equals 0, plus 7, x equals 7. So our answer in our scavenger hunt should have been 1 and 7. This should have been found on the top of this one. Factor into factor form. X to the 4th minus 10x squared plus 24 equals 0. So for this one, it is different due to the fact that we have a 4 in our exponent. This 4 in the exponent, we have to do something different. The difference is that we're using u equals x squared. So we have to convert our x to the 4th and x to the 2nd, or x squared, into our u's. So I'm going to take x to the fourth and separate it out. So I have x times x times x times x. That's the expanded form from the x to the fourth. The reason why is x 4 times multiplication in between is because our exponent properties tells us when we're multiplying, we're adding our exponents together. Well, the bases are the same, so we have 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, which is 4. Now, I can't use any of these x's right now to convert it to a u because I want it x squared. So I'm going to add only 2 of these together, only 2 of the exponents together, to make an x squared. So now I have x squared times x squared. So I converted these two into the first x squared and the last two x to the ones to the second x squared. Now I can convert it to u's. So now I have u times u. Well, now my bases are the same. I've understood ones and the exponents. So now I have u squared. That is how I'm going to convert x to the fourth to my u's. Now simply, going back to the original problem, this x squared is simply going to be u. So let's rewrite our problem. So we have u squared minus 10u plus 24. So I'm going to factor this as if they were my x's. So 24 in my big X method. Looking at 24 and 10. A lot of you have struggled on this, so let's go through all of the possibilities. So 1 and 24 is not going to give you 10. How about 2 and 12? Well, in your head, 2 and 12 could get you to 10, but let's look at those positives and negatives. 2 plus 12, negative 10. So to get to this negative 10, we could not have both of them negative because that would not get us to 10. Negative 2 plus negative 12 does not give you negative 10. To get to negative 10, you would have to have 2 minus 12, and that does give you negative 10, but that has one negative, one positive as our magic numbers. Multiplied together would not give you positive 24. So you would have to keep going. You would have to keep going until you get 4 and 6. 4 and 6, you can add and subtract to get to negative 10 because you would have to have negative 4 and negative 6 as your magic numbers. So now remember, we were factoring this step with the u's, not with the x's from all the way at the top. So when we put in our parentheses, we're looking for parentheses that have u's and not x's. So we're going to put our magic numbers in, negative 4, negative 6, and for this one, it said factor into factor form. So we are not done yet. You have to put in your x squares again. So this is going to be x squared, subtract 4, and this is going to be x squared minus 6. And this is your factored form. So this would be found at the top of your next one in your scavenger hunt. So I'm going to let you look at it just one more second. So this answer should have been the next one, and it would have been found on top of this one. Factor and solve x cubed minus 64 equals 0. So this was what we went over, I believe, Wednesday, about factoring cubes, difference of cubes. So we needed it to first ask ourselves, do we have our a cubed and our b cubed? Hopefully you can realize that this 64 doesn't have a cube in the exponent. So obviously we don't have our b cubed yet. So we're going to use our calculator to do that. So we can go to our graphing calculator. We hit our math key, and we go down to number 4, where it has 3 square root and then parentheses. That is what we want. I'm going to hit enter. Then the number I want to put under this cube root is 64. So I'm going to type in 64 and hit enter. And I get 4. What this cube root does is that answer of 4 raised to the 3rd power is that 64. Meaning 4 times 4 times 4 gives me 64. That is why I'm having to use that cube root. So now I can rewrite it as x to the 3rd minus 4 to the 3rd. So now I'm going to use my sum and difference equation or formula to plug in. This one is subtraction, so my subtraction formula is my a, subtract my b, parentheses, my a squared, plus my a times my b, plus my b squared. Now, just for study purposes, if we had addition in between our x cubed minus 64, it would be a plus b times a squared minus a b plus b squared. So key thing, something to remember, if we have subtraction, it's going to be subtraction, addition, and then addition, looking at the operations. If we have addition to begin with, it's going to be addition, subtraction, then addition. Okay, that's one way to remember it. So now we can plug it in or substitute into our formulas. So our A was x, and our B is 4. So we have x minus 4, parentheses are x squared plus 4x plus our 4 squared. So that would be our factored form, but this station or card in our scavenger hunt said solve, so we've got to solve. So I want to take my x minus 4 and set it equal to 0, and I have x equals positive 4. That is one of my answers, but then I have to find my other answers. So I first want to simplify. X squared plus 4x. 4 squared is the same thing as 4 times 4, hopefully you know, is 16. So I'm going to factor. So I've got, because this is equal to 0, so because this is a square root, I just simply factor. 16, 4, 2 values. That gets you to 16 multiplying or adding or subtracting to get you to 4. If you sit here and cannot think of it, then you use your quadratic formula. You can sit here forever. I could not come up with one in the time that I was doing my answer key. So we can go ahead and do quadratic formula. A is our 1, B is our 4, and C is our 16. So we have negative b, which is 4, plus or minus the square root. And yes, I'm having to get close because I'm writing and holding at the same time. 4 squared minus 4, a is 1, times our c, which is 12, all over to a, which is 1. So we're going to simplify this. So I've got negative 4 plus or minus. I'm going to put all of that in the calculator to find that out. And I get 80 over 2. I'm going to simplify the square root of 80. And I get negative 4 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 5 over 2. So I need to simplify this. This is not the answer. I have to look at my negative 4 over 2 and my 4 over 2. So to simplify this, I get negative 2 plus or minus positive 2 times the square root of 5. Because negative divided by positive is a negative 2, and that 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. So here is my other two answers. Remember, there's two answers because of that plus or minus. So on the scavenger hunt, it looks like this. X equals 4 and negative 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5. And that is your answer. This answer should have been found at the top of this one. So I'm going to make a second part to this video just so it's not too long and YouTube kicks it back